Whether it's a simple mistake in food storage or an unexpected encounter on a hike, ordinary people are thrust into life-or-death battles with one of nature's most fearsome predators. From quiet cabins and remote trails to bustling towns and Arctic ships, these true stories show how sudden bear attacks can turn everyday places into scenes of sheer terror. In this video, we'll uncover 6 real-life encounters where humans came face-to-face with bears, and only instinct stood between survival and tragedy. The cabin stood silent beneath the low cloud cover, surrounded by the thick woods of Sakhalin Island. It was early morning on May 24th, 2025. Mist drifted low across the mossy ground as salmon-filled streams pulsed through the forest less than half a mile away. The Airbnb listing had promised tranquility, a rustic escape from city noise. For 3 friends, Mikhail, 38, a quiet software developer, Igor, 41, a rugged outdoorsman turned online host, and Artyom, 33, a school teacher recovering from burnout, it was meant to be a weekend of rest, campfire stories, and good food. But they had left food scraps in the trash can near the back door. Some packaging had been tossed behind the cabin after a late barbecue. They hadn't thought much of it. None of them imagined a bear might catch the scent. None of them remembered the host's warning printed near the cabin's entrance. Secure all food. Grizzlies frequent the area. At 4:27 a.m., Mikhail woke first to a sound he couldn't place. A low, dragging scrape, then a sharp knock, like wood splintering. It echoed from the back of the cabin. He sat up slowly in the darkness, heart suddenly hammering. A few seconds later, the sharp bang came again, louder now. Then the wood cracked. Something heavy crashed into the door. On the 3rd strike, it exploded inward. Cold air burst into the small space. The dim moonlight framed a huge silhouette that ducked into the cabin. A massive Russian grizzly, its fur wet and matted, shoulders hunched like a charging tank. It moved fast, too fast for them to react. The bear surged forward, heading straight toward the small kitchen table where Igor had left his backpack filled with jerky and other snacks. In its fury, the animal knocked over a chair, smashing it into the wall. The noise woke Igor and Artyom just as the bear turned, catching their movement. The attack began in an instant. The bear lunged at Igor first, batting him aside with one enormous paw. Igor hit the floor hard, back scraping against a wooden bench. A deep gash split open across his chest where the bear's claws had struck. Blood smeared the wooden planks beneath him as he rolled away, groaning. Mikhail grabbed the metal fire poker beside the wood stove and swung it unthinkingly. The poker struck the bear's flank with a loud metallic thud. It roared in fury, twisting toward the new threat. It knocked Mikhail onto his back and drove a paw across his side. Bones cracked. He screamed as pain exploded through his ribs. The bear reared up, mouth open, fangs flashing, saliva dripping. Pale and trembling, Artyom grabbed the only thing within reach, a broken table leg, and ran toward the bear. He jabbed it into the bear's shoulder, barely piercing the fur, but the distraction worked. The bear turned to him and charged. Artyom didn't run. He ducked low, avoiding the first swipe, but the second struck his thigh and sent him backward. He slammed against the wall and fell in a heap, leg torn open and bleeding fast. The grizzly paced in a tight circle, growling, sniffing at the spilled food and blood. It seemed momentarily confused, surrounded by broken furniture and groaning bodies. Mikhail forced himself up, clutching his ribs. He saw the bear's attention shift toward Igor, who was crawling toward the bedroom. Summoning everything he had, Mikhail released a long, guttural scream and charged with the poker raised. He struck the bear again, this time across the muzzle. The bear roared in pain and rage, whipping its head around, jaws snapping. Mikhail fell back, hands shaking, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the animal's growls. Igor, bloodied but determined, pulled a flare gun from his backpack inside the room. He aimed it shakily from the doorway. His fingers trembled as he fired. The flare burst with a blinding light and sharp hiss. It struck the cabin ceiling, setting a beam briefly aflame before extinguishing. The bear flinched at the flash, recoiling toward the broken door. It let out a deep growl and backed away, ears flat. The scent of smoke filled the air now, mixing with blood and the musky odor of the animal. The bear lingered one last second, then turned and bounded out into the dark. The silence followed was broken only by their ragged breathing and the creak of wood settling. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, soaked into their clothes. Mikhail collapsed onto a chair, ribs screaming in pain. Artyom moaned softly from the wall. Igor clutched his torn chest and stared at the doorway. They didn't know if it would come back. They spent the next hour securing the cabin as best they could. Mikhail propped the stove against the destroyed doorway. Igor used a rope to tie furniture together in front of the opening. Artyom drifted in and out of consciousness, his leg bandaged with torn sheets. They wrapped their wounds as best they could and waited for dawn. The emergency beacon on Igor's phone finally caught a signal just before 6. A rescue helicopter didn't arrive until after 10. By then, the cold had worsened the bleeding, and none could stand. The rescuers found them weak, battered, and barely coherent. All three were hospitalized in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk. None suffered life-threatening injuries, though Mikhail needed surgery for cracked ribs and a punctured lung. Artyom underwent skin grafts. Igor, with the deepest claw wounds, bore long scars down his chest. The attack shocked local authorities and made national news. The cabin, advertised to tourists as a peaceful wilderness retreat, had not been properly inspected for bear safety. Food had not been stored in sealed containers, and no bear-proof garbage bins were present. The back door had been weakened by moisture and rot, barely enough to keep out wind, let alone a bear. Debates erupted about Airbnb safety standards in rural Russia. Conservationists pointed to the salmon streams and early bear activity in May as predictable risks. Others demanded tighter regulations for cabins near bear territory, especially concerning food storage and reinforced entryways. For Mikhail, Igor, and Artyom, it became a nightmare they would never forget. The sounds, the roar, the crash, the wet thud of claws against flesh haunted their sleep. They had come seeking peace. Instead, they found the raw violence of nature waiting just beyond the walls. The sun had only risen when Emily stepped onto the narrow, unmarked trail that twisted through the backcountry of a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. A quiet morning mist clung to the trees, and birds chirped in the upper branches. Emily, 29, a passionate solo hiker from Oregon, was no stranger to long, isolated treks. She had spent years hiking alone, documenting her journeys through photos and journal notes. This weekend, she had chosen a route she found on an old forum, quiet, remote, and barely touched. She started hiking light before dawn, her gear tucked into a small backpack. Noise-canceling headphones blocked out everything but the soft piano music she loved. The sound calmed her. She wasn't worried. She had bear spray and a whistle and knew the typical guidelines, but she preferred silence over the crunch of boots and wind in the trees. It made her feel free. The trail was overgrown, framed by thick lodgepole pines and dense underbrush. She had seen no one since leaving the trailhead. Around mile 5, the forest closed in tighter and she slowed. A shallow stream cut across the trail ahead, its banks muddy with fresh prints, though Emily didn't notice. Her music played softly, her breath steady as she stepped across a downed log. 100 feet away, hidden behind a curtain of young spruce, a large male grizzly was foraging for roots and early berries. The bear had not heard her. The breeze was faint and didn't carry her scent. Emily kept walking, focused on her path and lost in the music. When she stepped into the clearing and turned slightly toward the bear's side, the animal lifted its head sharply, its ears flattened. Its massive body went still. For a full second, neither of them moved. Then the bear charged. Emily didn't see it until it was almost on her. A rustle in the brush became a crashing sound, a blur of fur and muscle hurtling forward with terrifying speed. She ripped the headphones from her ears as the growl hit her like thunder. Her body froze. The bear was seconds away. Her instincts took over. She flung her backpack sideways and threw herself to the ground, arms over her neck, legs splayed. She lay still. Her heart raced so hard it hurt, but she didn't move. The grizzly slammed into her pack first, scattering gear and snapping a water bottle in half with its jaws. Then it turned to her. Its massive paws circled her back. Claws raked down her shoulder blades, slicing through her jacket and skin. She felt fire streak through her upper back as blood seeped into the earth. Then teeth found her thigh. The bear bit down hard, lifting her slightly, shaking her once. Her scream remained trapped in her throat. She fought to stay limp. The pain was all-consuming, like being crushed and sliced at once. Her breath stuttered, but she didn't scream. She didn't fight. It dropped her, huffed loudly, then raked her leg again with a paw. Another bite caught her ribs, tearing through flesh and pressing bone. Her vision blurred. Every part of her body begged to run, to roll away, but she didn't. She stayed limp, trying to convince the bear she was no longer a threat. The attack stretched into long, agonizing minutes. The bear circled, sniffed her body, and pawed at her backpack again. Her blood was everywhere. She heard nothing but the thundering beat of her heart, and the bear's snorting breath just inches from her. Then it stopped. She dared not lift her head but could hear it walking away. Slow, heavy steps, cracking twigs. It paused once, grunted, and then the sound of movement faded into the trees. She lay still, even after silence returned. Only when she was sure the bear was gone did she lift her head, shaking, covered in blood. Her right leg was mangled. Deep punctures marked her upper arm and ribs. Her jacket was soaked through. She couldn't move without searing pain. One side of her chest felt caved in, a fracture, maybe several. She didn't have the strength to reach for her phone, and the nearest signal was miles away. Unused bear spray lay spilled near the stream, and her whistle was broken. She pressed her head into the dirt, fighting to stay conscious. The morning sun passed overhead. The heat crept in. Hours dragged by. Birds returned to the trees. A squirrel darted near her, then fled. At some point, her breathing slowed to shallow gasps. She drifted in and out, fading. It wasn't until early afternoon that a pair of backcountry rangers, rerouted after spotting her car alone at the trailhead, found her lying near the stream. One of them vomited at the sight of her wounds. The other radioed for air support. The helicopter landed 30 minutes later. Medics loaded her in, stabilizing her with IV fluids and oxygen. She was barely conscious but alive. Surgeons at a trauma center in Bozeman spent hours reconstructing her leg and cleaning the wounds. Her rib fractures were serious, but her lung hadn't collapsed. Her thigh required a metal rod. Her back would be scarred, but the damage to her spine had spared her mobility. The attack shocked everyone who heard about it. Photos of her torn backpack and shredded jacket circulated among park rangers and hikers. Officials used the incident to renew warnings across the national park and beyond. Do not hike silently. Do not wear headphones. Make noise, and let bears know you're coming. Emily survived, but everything changed. The trails that had once brought her peace now brought memories of teeth and claws, the moment of impact, and the unbearable silence before the roar. She no longer hiked alone. She kept the shredded jacket as a reminder, the scars beneath it now part of her story. She had come for solitude. Instead, she found a brutal reminder. Silence is not safety in bear country. It's a gamble. The cargo vessel Arctic Voyager sliced slowly through the ice-choked waters of the Northwest Passage on a chilly, overcast afternoon in May 2025. Captain Sergei Ivanov, a seasoned mariner with decades of experience navigating these treacherous northern seas, kept a steady watch from the bridge. The world around him was changing fast. Melting sea ice opened new shipping routes that had been impassable only a few years ago. Yet the promise of quicker passages brought risks no one had fully anticipated. The ship's hold was packed tight with thousands of kilograms of salted and frozen fish, destined for remote Arctic communities. The strong smell of fish permeated the cold air, a faint but steady scent leaking through the seals of the refrigerated containers. The hold's doors were locked, but the bitter Arctic temperatures had started to thaw the seals and warp the metal edges, leaving small gaps. In the shifting ice and endless twilight, the Arctic Voyager was a beacon for more than just humans. After briefly docking at a tiny Arctic port along Nunavut's northern coast, the ship's crew performed routine checks. During the first watch, Nikolai and Alexei had been assigned to inspect the refrigerated cargo hold late at night. Nikolai was 28, a wiry deckhand from Murmansk with quick reflexes and a tough edge earned from years at sea. Alexei, 34, was a seasoned engineer, more cautious but steady under pressure. Descending the narrow metal stairwell, they stepped into the chilling cold of the hold, their breath visible in clouds. The floor beneath was slick with frost, and the faint glow from their flashlights cast eerie shadows across rows of stacked crates. The pungent odor of fish was stronger here, thick in the cold air. Nikolai's eyes flicked over the metal walls, sharp claws and scratch marks visible near the heavy hatch. A sudden low growl broke the silence. Both men froze. A massive white form erupted from the darkness like a ghost from the shadows. The polar bear stood nearly 10 feet tall on its hind legs, its thick white fur almost glowing in the faint light, and its dark eyes shining with wild hunger and desperation. It was a formidable force, a king of the Arctic's frozen wastes, but it was trapped in a place it did not belong. Nikolai shouted a warning, but his voice was swallowed by the bear's furious roar, which echoed through the hold like a thunderclap. The two men barely had time to react. Alexei grabbed a fire extinguisher, swinging it like a club, hoping to scare the beast away. The hollow clang of the extinguisher striking the bear's side seemed to irritate rather than deter it. With terrifying speed, the polar bear charged. Nikolai barely dodged a swipe of its massive paw, the heavy claws tearing the metal floor and kicking up shards of ice. The bear's momentum crashed into Alexei's left arm, shattering the fabric of his jacket and tearing deep into the flesh beneath. Blood seeped rapidly through torn skin, cold and sticky in the frozen air. His heart pounding, Nikolai grabbed a metal pipe from the nearby wall. He swung it with all his might, connecting with a harsh clang against the bear's snout. The animal snarled in pain but did not retreat. Instead, it pivoted and bit deep into Nikolai's right shoulder. Sharp teeth sank through muscle and bone, shredding flesh with horrifying force. Nikolai screamed silently, his vision blurring as the bear shook him violently. Summoning every ounce of strength, Nikolai jabbed the pipe into the bear's eye. The creature yelped, reeling back and pawing frantically at the injury. Alexei struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm, and sprayed the fire extinguisher directly into the bear's face. The bear sneezed violently, stumbling backward, and its eyes watered. For a breathless moment, the threat seemed to pause. Then, with a sudden fury, it charged again, barreling toward the narrow stairwell that led back to the ship's upper decks. Nikolai and Alexei scrambled, bashing metal crates and railings, making as much noise as possible to intimidate the intruder. The bear halted at the base of the stairs, snarling and pounding the floor with massive paws, but did not follow. Gasping for breath, soaked in blood and pain, the two men collapsed against the cold steel walls. Nikolai's right shoulder was shattered, blood pouring from deep bite wounds. Alexei's left arm throbbed fiercely, bones bruised but intact. Their clothes were torn and stained. They knew the bear might return at any moment. Captain Ivanov was immediately informed. The ship's doctor came down with first aid supplies, applying pressure bandages and painkillers. Emergency communication was sent to the nearest Arctic medical facility, hundreds of miles away. As dawn broke over the ice, helicopters were dispatched. The Arctic Voyager's voyage was delayed indefinitely, while Nikolai and Alexei were evacuated for advanced treatment. Both men suffered serious but non-fatal injuries, deep puncture wounds, extensive bruising, and torn muscles. Surgeons would later confirm Nikolai had suffered partial nerve damage in his shoulder, threatening his ability to work at sea again. Later investigations revealed the polar bear had been drawn to the ship by the irresistible scent of fish. It had clawed its way through weakened seals and small gaps in the cargo hold, scavenging for hours before the crew's inspection. The damage was extensive. Crates were punctured, frozen fish spilled across the floor, and the scent had leaked into the port's quiet night air. Scientists studying the Arctic environment noted this was one of several recent incidents in which polar bears had come into direct contact with humans aboard ships and coastal settlements. Melting sea ice had forced the bears to alter their hunting patterns and seek food in new places, sometimes perilously close to human activity. The event triggered urgent discussions among maritime authorities and wildlife experts. It became clear that vessels operating in the Arctic needed better security measures, reinforced hold doors, electrified fencing systems, and trained wildlife deterrent teams to protect crews and wildlife alike. For Nikolai and Alexei, the ordeal left a permanent mark. The memory of that white fury, its wild eyes, powerful paws, and raw terror and pain would haunt them forever. Both men returned home with visible and invisible scars. They spoke little of the night, but carried its lessons in every cautious step afterward. The Arctic Voyager resumed its journey weeks later, sailing cautiously through shrinking ice fields. Yet the shadow of the bear's raid lingered, a stark reminder that the boundaries between human industry and wild nature were fragile and dangerous in this rapidly changing world. As the ship moved steadily north, the crew remained vigilant, knowing the Arctic was no longer a frozen wilderness, untouched by human presence. The polar bear's desperate raid was a warning. The frozen kingdom was shifting, and survival meant adapting to new rules where man and beast could no longer avoid crossing paths. The early morning fog clung thickly over the pine-lined outskirts of Clearwater, a small Montana town nestled at the edge of wilderness. The quiet streets held a fragile calm, but that morning, tension hung invisible in the air. Two police officers, Daniels and Martinez, patrolled the area on routine duty, their sharp eyes scanning the edge where forest met suburb. Calls reported a massive grizzly bear roaming dangerously close to homes, knocking over trash bins and frightening residents. The officers had been trained for wildlife encounters, but nothing could fully prepare them for the moment that was about to unfold. Officer Daniels was 42, a seasoned lawman with years of experience in the rugged rural county. He carried himself with a steady confidence, familiar with the dangers lurking just beyond the tree line. Martinez, his partner, was younger, 35, with quick reflexes and a fierce determination to protect the community. Both men understood the risks of patrolling near bear country, especially in spring and early summer, when the animals wandered widely seeking food. They drove slowly down a gravel road, flanked by dense evergreens and scattered cabins. The smell of damp earth and pine filled the air, and birds called softly above. The officers knew the bear was close. Large paw prints and claw marks on trees marked the beast's recent path. As their patrol car rolled to a stop near the edge of a wooded area, both officers stepped out, their boots crunching on gravel. Their eyes scanned the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, a massive shape burst from the underbrush, a towering grizzly, its thick brown fur mottled and soaked with dew. The bear's eyes burned with wild fury, teeth bared, muscles rippling beneath its heavy frame. The charge came swiftly and brutally. Daniels barely had time to react. He reached for his taser and fired, the electric probe shooting toward the bear's chest. But the device seemed useless against the thick hide and raw power barreling toward him. The bear barely flinched. The grizzly slammed into Daniels with a deafening roar, knocking him backward. Pain exploded in his left arm as the bear's massive jaws clamped down, teeth sinking deep through fabric and flesh. Blood spurted, warm and sticky. Daniels screamed silently, his vision narrowing to red rings as the animal shook him violently. Martinez shouted a warning and drew his weapon, but it was not a gun. It was the bear spray, a last-ditch deterrent meant to repel but not kill. The bear swiped at Martinez, knocking him to the ground with a crushing blow. Rocks and dirt sprayed as the smaller officer tried to shield himself, his heart pounding. The bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through jacket and skin. Despite their injuries, the officers fought back with everything they had. Daniels, blood pouring from his arm, struggled to free himself from the bear's powerful grip. He grabbed Martinez's bear spray with desperate strength and fired a cloud of noxious spray directly into the bear's snarling face. The bear staggered back, coughing and pawing at its eyes. The sharp, burning spray pierced the animal's sensitive nose and eyes, breaking its relentless assault. Seizing the moment, Martinez scrambled to his feet, grabbing the second canister and unleashing a thick mist into the beast's open mouth and eyes. The grizzly roared in pain and fury, but began to retreat, limping awkwardly toward the shadowed woods. Blood dripped from its snout and clawed eyes, but it was alive and angry. The officers collapsed onto the gravel road, gasping for air and soaked in their blood. Daniel's left arm was mangled, with deep puncture wounds and crushed muscles. Martinez's back and ribs throbbed painfully, torn but intact. Within minutes, emergency medical teams arrived, alerted by frantic calls from nearby residents. Paramedics rushed to stabilize the men, applying pressure bandages to stop the bleeding and administering oxygen to ease their shallow breaths. A helicopter stood ready on a makeshift landing zone nearby, its rotors chopping through the tense morning air. The men were airlifted to the nearest hospital in Helena, Montana, where surgeons worked for hours to repair nerve damage, stop internal bleeding, and mend shattered bones. Both officers survived the attack but faced long, grueling recoveries. Daniels would need months of physical therapy to regain full use of his arm, while Martinez battled severe bruising and broken ribs that left him breathless for weeks. The attack sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement agencies. Questions arose immediately about how such a dangerous encounter could occur so close to a town's edge, and whether police officers were adequately prepared for wildlife confrontations in areas where bears roamed freely. The taser's failure and the reliance on bear spray sparked fierce debate about police equipment standards and training. Wildlife experts and conservationists weighed in, reminding the public that grizzly bears were a protected species vital to the region's ecosystem, but could be deadly when threatened or cornered. They warned that expanding human settlements into bear habitats increased the risk of dangerous encounters, especially as bears followed food sources into populated areas. Authorities launched a review of bear management policies around Clearwater and similar towns. They looked at better community education on avoiding attractants like unsecured garbage and outdoor pet food. They also considered enhanced patrols, public alerts, and improved emergency response protocols. The incident was a brutal reminder of the wildness lurking beyond the human footprint for Daniels and Martinez. The attack left scars deeper than those visible on their bodies. Both men carried that day's weight in quiet reflection, knowing they had survived a fight few ever faced and lived to tell the tale. Their courage and quick thinking saved each other's lives, and their ordeal became a stark warning to others about the fine line between man and nature in Montana's wilderness. The grizzly bear, powerful and untamed, remained a force of nature that no human weapon could fully control, Only respect and caution might keep such deadly meetings rare. The late summer evening settled softly over the small Vermont town of Millersville. The sun dipped low behind thick stands of maple and oak, casting long shadows across the streets. Jenna, a young woman in her mid-20s, who had worked as a clerk at Millersville Grocery for nearly 3 years, was finishing her closing routine. The store was modest, rows of fresh produce, canned goods, and household essentials, but it was the heart of the community. Jenna knew most customers by name and enjoyed the quiet moments when the last few stragglers left, and she could tidy the aisles before locking the doors. As she wiped down the counters near the front entrance that night, a faint rustling caught her attention from the back parking lot. Her brow furrowed. At first, she thought it might be a stray dog or a neighborhood cat, but the sound was heavier, more deliberate. She paused and glanced out the small window behind the checkout stand. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few parked cars bathed in the fading light. Near the back door, something large and dark shifted among the shadows. Jenna's heart quickened as she realized it was a black bear, a young male, his thick fur glossy under the streetlight, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The faint scent of ripe fruit and sweet berries had drawn him there. The bear seemed cautious at first, moving slowly toward the back door, which Jenna had forgotten to close tightly while bringing in a shipment earlier that day. The slightly ajar door provided an inviting gap, and the bear slipped inside without hesitation. Jenna's breath caught. She knew bears were common in the Vermont woods surrounding the town, but never had one ventured into a store before. The bear's large paws made heavy thuds on the tile floor as he entered, his dark eyes scanning the bright aisles lined with colorful fruits and vegetables. The bear ambled casually toward the produce section near the back, drawn irresistibly to the piles of apples, berries, and peaches stacked in open crates. Jenna moved cautiously behind a checkout counter, watching in awe and fear. The bear raised a massive paw and knocked over a display of apples, sending them rolling across the floor like marbles. He sniffed greedily, then grabbed handfuls of red and green fruit, stuffing them into his mouth with a crunch of skin and pulp. Despite the surreal calm of the moment, Jenna's pulse raced. The bear's low and rumbling growls vibrated like distant thunder. She knew she had to act carefully. Any sudden move might provoke him. After several minutes, she tried to guide the bear toward the exit. Stepping slowly from behind the counter, she raised her arms and made herself appear larger, hoping to intimidate it gently without startling it. The bear's head snapped up, and its eyes locked onto hers. They stared at each other for a tense heartbeat, predator and human, worlds apart yet in the same space. Then, unexpectedly, the bear growled sharply and charged. Jenna stumbled backward, crashing into a canned goods display, rattling loudly but did not fall. She caught herself just in time, heart pounding wildly. The bear stopped inches away, sniffing the air between them, nostrils flaring. It seemed more startled than angry. Jenna backed away carefully, retreating toward a narrow corridor near the storage rooms. She knew that corner was safe, away from the main floor and near the back exit. Once behind a sturdy metal shelf, she pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed animal control. Her voice was low but steady as she explained the situation and requested immediate assistance. Minutes passed like hours. The bear, meanwhile, continued to roam the aisles, knocking over more displays and pawing at cartons of berries. Its movements were restless but not frantic, as if it were both curious and confused by the strange surroundings. Outside, distant sirens wailed, and the muffled voices of officers approached. The bear's ears twitched, nostrils flaring again. Slowly, it turned toward the open back door, lured by the noises and smells beyond. In a final glance back at the scattered fruit and toppled displays, the bear lumbered toward freedom and vanished into the night. Jenna exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands shook as she stepped out from her hiding place, carefully surveying the wreckage left behind. The store was messy, fruit crushed and bruised, toppled cans and dented shelves. But she was unharmed. The animal control officers arrived shortly afterward, securing the area and checking the parking lot for signs the bear might linger. They reassured Jenna and spoke of the challenges bears faced living close to human settlements, where food sources like garbage bins, bird feeders, and in rare cases, grocery stores created dangerous temptations. News of the bear's grocery store visit spread quickly through Millersville. Locals shared stories about the audacity of a wild animal wandering boldly into a store, the chaos and surprise it caused, and Jenna's quick thinking that prevented a worse outcome. For Jenna, The event was a reminder of the delicate balance between human life and the wilderness that surrounded them. The bear, driven by hunger and perhaps the loss of its natural habitat, had crossed an invisible line, reminding everyone that wild creatures remained close in the quiet towns near the forest, drawn by the scent of human food. Officials urged the community to be vigilant, secure garbage, avoid leaving food outdoors, and respect the bear's space. The story became a cautionary tale about the consequences of encroaching on wildlife territory and the surprising ways nature could push back. In the following weeks, Jenna often thought about the bear, how it had moved through the store with calm determination, how close danger it felt, and how fragile the boundary between safety and threat could be. The memory was vivid. The bear's dark eyes met hers, the soft crunch of apples beneath giant paws, and the wildness beyond the glass doors. Though the damage was minor compared to what might have been, the incident left an imprint on the town's collective memory, a repeated story. A reminder that even in the most ordinary places, the wild could appear suddenly and change everything. The Montana backcountry was a vast wilderness of towering pines, rocky ridges, and wide meadows bathed in late afternoon sunlight. Hunter Paul had been out for days tracking elk across this rugged land. He was a man in his early 40s, experienced and self-reliant, with a passion for the outdoors that had shaped his life since youth. That morning, his patience had paid off. A clean shot had brought down a large bull elk, and Paul had felt a deep satisfaction as he prepared to process the animal. As evening crept in, Paul set up camp in a small clearing near a creek, surrounded by thick forest. He hung some gear from a tree, but made a critical error. The elk carcass was left partially exposed on the ground near his tent. Fatigue and excitement dulled his caution. The crisp mountain air carried the rich scent of blood and meat, an irresistible lure to the local wildlife, especially the grizzlies known to roam these parts. Night fell quickly. The stars glittered overhead, and the forest grew silent except for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Paul lay inside his tent, exhausted and satisfied. Outside, hidden in the shadows beyond the firelight, a massive grizzly stirred, drawn by the smell of the fresh kill. The bear moved cautiously at first, sniffing the air with powerful nostrils, eyes reflecting moonlight. Hunger gnawed at it fiercely, and the scent of elk was a feast it could not ignore. The grizzly approached the camp silently, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, its heavy paws making little sound on the soft earth. Suddenly, Paul's dog, tethered nearby, began to bark sharply, breaking the quiet. The bear froze for a moment, then surged forward with terrifying speed. Paul rushed out of his tent, heart pounding, grabbing a flashlight and his hunting knife. He shouted and waved his arms, pounding the ground and yelling to scare the animal away. The grizzly reared back for an instant, then charged, its roar shattering the night like thunder. The first attack was brutal. The bear swiped with one massive paw, slamming Paul into the dirt with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded through his ribs, a sharp crack echoing inside his chest. The grizzly's jaws snapped near his arm, biting down with savage strength and tearing flesh. Blood poured freely as Paul struggled to fight back. Despite the fear and pain, Paul's instincts kicked in. He thrust his knife toward the bear's face, aiming for the sensitive eyes. The blade found its mark, eliciting a howl of rage from the beast. The grizzly shook violently, then lunged again. Paul used his boots as weapons, kicking fiercely at the bear's snout and sides. Each strike was desperate, meant to create space and slow the predator. He was no match for the grizzly's strength, but he knew that giving in meant certain death. The struggle raged on for minutes that felt like hours. The forest around them was silent, except for the clash of man and beast. Growls, snarls, grunts of pain, and the harsh sounds of Paul gasping for air. Finally, the bear, wounded and frustrated by Paul's resistance, pulled back, growling low, but retreating into the trees. Paul lay on the ground, bleeding heavily, ribs aching with every breath, limbs trembling. Pain threatened to overwhelm him, but survival drove him onward. He crawled back to his camp, reached his radio, and sent a faint distress signal. His voice was weak but urgent, and he hoped rescue teams would find him before darkness swallowed the forest completely. The night was long and cold. Paul used the last of his strength to tend to his wounds, wrapping torn clothes around deep cuts to slow bleeding. The sound of distant sirens and searching voices finally reached his ears just before dawn. Rescue crews arrived, carefully carrying Paul on a stretcher through the rugged terrain to a waiting helicopter. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to repair shattered ribs, deep bite wounds, and punctures that had nearly reached vital organs. Though the injuries were severe, Paul was expected to survive. The attack left a permanent mark on him, not just physical scars, but a haunting memory of how quickly danger could erupt in the wilderness. It was a stark lesson in respect for the power of nature and the importance of caution. Wildlife officials used Paul's story to emphasize the dangers of improper carcass and food storage in bear country. They urged hunters and campers to follow strict protocols, secure meat in bear-proof containers, hang carcasses high and far from campsites, and always be aware of local wildlife activity. The incident was a harsh reminder that one small mistake could turn a rewarding hunt into a desperate fight for survival in the wild. The grizzly bear, a magnificent but deadly guardian of the Montana wilderness, had exacted a fierce revenge, teaching a lesson that would resonate for years.